In the autumn of 2002, the United States was still recovering from the trauma of September 11th. Airports were under tight security. People looked over their shoulders in public places, and the idea of safety, even in the suburbs, felt more like an illusion than a guarantee. But no one, not even the most paranoid, expected what was about to unfold in the heart of the country's capital region. This is the true story of how two men, one a highly trained former soldier, the other a vulnerable teenage boy, terrorized an entire population from inside the trunk of a car. Their weapon, a high-powered rifle. Their targets, completely random. Their motive, more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. What began as an isolated shooting quickly turned into one of the most intense manhunts in American history. A case that paralyzed cities, changed law enforcement strategies, and exposed the terrifying vulnerability of everyday life. It started without warning. James Martin was a 55-year-old program analyst, father, and beloved member of his local church. That afternoon, like so many others before it, he stopped by a local grocery store in Wheaton after work. As he walked across the parking lot with his shopping bags in hand, he suddenly dropped to the ground. A woman nearby saw him collapse. She thought he may have had a heart attack, but when she rushed to help, she saw something worse. Blood pooling around him. James had been shot. She ducked behind a nearby car and dialed 911. Emergency services arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. James Martin died in the ambulance from a single bullet wound to the chest. There were no witnesses who saw a gun, no sounds of a fight, no suspicious individuals. Just one quiet gunshot, and then silence. At first, police treated it as an isolated homicide, perhaps a mugging gone wrong, but something didn't add up. James wasn't robbed. His wallet and personal items were untouched, and the autopsy revealed something alarming. The bullet that killed him had been fired from a high-powered rifle, one capable of long-range precision. It was an unsettling detail, but the horror had only just begun. The next morning, Montgomery County woke up to news of the previous night's murder. The local media covered it briefly, but no one could have predicted what was coming next. At 7:41 a.m., Sonny Buchanan, a 39-year-old landscaper, was mowing the lawn at the Fitzgerald Auto Mall in Rockville. He was known in the area, friendly, hard-working, always punctual. As he pushed his mower in neat rows, a shot rang out. He dropped to the ground instantly. Customers and employees rushed out to find him unresponsive. He had been shot in the chest. Less than 30 minutes later, just 5 miles away, another shooting occurred. Prem Kumar Walekar, a 54-year-old taxi driver originally from India, was filling up his car at a mobile gas station in Aspen Hill. He was shot once in the torso and died on the scene. He had 3 daughters and had worked in the D.C. area for over a decade. At 8:37 a.m., Sarah Ramos, a 34-year-old housekeeper, was sitting on a bench outside a post office, waiting for her employer. She had a Spanish-language book open on her lap when a single bullet entered her head. She died instantly. 10 minutes later, Laurie Ann Lewis Rivera, a 25-year-old nanny and mother of a 3-year-old daughter, was vacuuming her minivan at a Shell gas station. Witnesses heard the gunshot but saw no shooter. She was pronounced dead at the scene. At 9:58 a.m., the 5th victim of the morning, 72-year-old Pascal Charlot, was shot while walking down Georgia Avenue. He had been on his way to buy groceries for his wife. A single bullet ended his life in an instant. 5 people, killed in public, broad daylight, all in the span of less than 2 hours, all within a 10-mile radius. The city was in shock. By noon, the streets of Montgomery County were empty. Schools went into lockdown. Outdoor activities were canceled. People avoided gas stations and grocery store parking lots. Police advised residents to shelter in place. Even walking across the street became a source of anxiety. Families started driving erratically to avoid becoming targets. It wasn't uncommon to see pedestrians running in zigzag patterns or crouching behind cars. The randomness of the shootings meant that no one felt safe, and everyone could be next. The killer, it seemed, had no pattern. The victims were male and female, young and old, of different ethnicities and backgrounds. There was no known connection between them. The only common factor was the method: a single bullet, perfectly placed from a distance. Law enforcement set up dozens of checkpoints. SWAT teams monitored rooftops, school zones, and wooded areas. Officers inspected every white van they came across, largely due to a witness who had reported seeing one at the scene of Sarah Ramos's murder. It was a tip that would later prove misleading, but at the time, it was the best lead they had. Theories began to circulate. Some believed the sniper was a trained assassin. Others speculated it was an act of terrorism, still fresh in the national psyche just a year after 9/11. Was it Al-Qaeda, a domestic extremist, a lone gunman with military training? The media didn't help. Television anchors ran sensational headlines. Radio hosts theorized live on air. Fear turned into obsession. At the Montgomery County Police Department, Chief Charles Moose led the press briefings. Calm but visibly tense, he addressed the public multiple times per day, urging citizens to remain alert and to report any suspicious behavior. Behind the scenes, the FBI and ATF analyzed ballistics. Their early findings confirmed that all the bullets came from the same type of rifle, a Bushmaster XM15E2S, chambered in .223 caliber. It was a civilian version of the M16, lightweight, accurate, and deadly. But even more concerning was the trajectory of the bullets. All shots had been fired from near ground level, traveling in straight lines. This ruled out a rooftop shooter. The sniper wasn't above the crowd. He was among them, likely in a car. This realization changed everything. A new hypothesis emerged. The shooter was firing from inside a vehicle, possibly from the trunk, using a custom-built concealment. It explained the clean escapes, the lack of sightings, and the speed with which the killer vanished after each attack. The idea was chilling. The killer could be anyone, in any car, sitting at a stoplight, parked near a playground. There was no pattern, no rhythm, and no warning. The police urged residents not just to avoid open spaces, but to look around constantly, even while pumping gas. People were told to crouch while filling their tanks, to move quickly from their homes to their vehicles, and to cover their heads when walking across parking lots. As the sniper continued his rampage, the map of attacks began to spread outward. What had started in Montgomery County now threatened a much wider area. Every new shooting widened the radius of fear. No place felt safe. At 2:30 p.m. in the parking lot of a Michael's craft store in Fredericksburg, Virginia, a 43-year-old woman named Caroline Sewell was loading bags into her minivan. She had just finished grocery shopping. Without warning, a single gunshot struck her in the abdomen. Caroline collapsed, but unlike the previous victims, she didn't die. A bystander called 911 immediately, and paramedics managed to stabilize her. She was rushed into surgery and survived. Doctors later revealed that the bullet had pierced her liver, a potentially fatal injury, but rapid response saved her life. Caroline became the sniper's first known survivor. Ballistics confirmed it was the same rifle, the Bushmaster XM15. A witness at the scene said they saw a white van fleeing the area. Once again, this led police to believe they were hunting someone in a commercial vehicle. The now infamous white van theory took over headlines. Three days later, the sniper did something even more disturbing. At 8:09 a.m., outside Benjamin Tasker Middle School in Bowie, Maryland, 13-year-old Iran Brown was dropped off by his aunt, Tanya. As he walked toward the school entrance, a gunshot rang out. Iran collapsed, bleeding from his chest and stomach. Tanya, a nurse and former Navy medic, reacted instantly. She sprinted to her nephew, carried him back to the car, and raced to the nearest hospital. Along the way, she kept pressure on the wound and kept Iran conscious. Surgeons worked for hours. Iran had a shattered diaphragm and damage to his liver, stomach, and pancreas. But he survived. For the first time, the sniper had targeted a child. The psychological impact on the public was enormous. Parents began pulling their kids from school. Bus routes were canceled. Outdoor recess was suspended across multiple counties. Authorities searched a nearby wooded area for evidence, and what they found sent chills down their spines. Pinned to a tree near the sniper's apparent firing position was a tarot card, the death card. On the back of the card was a handwritten message. "For you, Mr. Policeman, call me God. Don't tell the press." It was the first direct message from the killer, cold, taunting, and deeply calculated. The public panic now reached a boiling point. National news covered the shootings 24/7. The term D.C. sniper became a household phrase. Police departments across Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. were overwhelmed with tips. More than 100,000 calls flooded the tip lines, many from people claiming to have seen something or someone or somewhere they thought seemed suspicious. The vast majority of these leads turned out to be false. The idea of the white van became an obsession. Any commercial vehicle, FedEx, plumbing companies, moving trucks, was pulled over and searched. Officers reported people calling 911 just because a van was parked near a shopping center. Meanwhile, Chief Charles Moose continued holding public press conferences. He looked tired, frustrated, desperate. Some questioned whether releasing too much information to the public was backfiring. The killer, after all, was likely watching the news, and he seemed to be adapting. Each new revelation released by the police was followed by a change in the killer's tactics, suggesting that whoever was behind this was not only skilled, but also strategic. After 3 quiet days, the sniper struck again, twice in a single day. The first shooting occurred in Manassas, Virginia, outside a gas station. The victim, Dean Harold Myers, was a civil engineer and Vietnam veteran. He was shot while refueling his car. Later that night, 53-year-old Kenneth Bridges was shot and killed at an Exxon station near Fredericksburg. He was a businessman and father of 6, on his way to a conference. Again, no witnesses. Again, no fingerprints. Just one shot and gone. This time, the FBI took over communications and strategy. A mobile command center was set up. Behavioral analysts worked around the clock to create a profile. They believed the killer was likely male, military trained, and operating with a partner. Someone to drive, while the other fired. The clean execution of the crimes made it clear this was no amateur. Five days passed without an attack. Then, on the evening of October 14th, outside a Home Depot in Falls Church, Virginia, 47-year-old Linda Franklin was helping her husband load a shelf into their car. A gunshot. She dropped. Her husband never even saw the shooter. Linda was an FBI analyst. Her death devastated the law enforcement community. She had worked closely with agents who were now investigating her own murder. Witnesses again claimed to see a white van, but one man gave a detailed report. He said the shooter was an Arab-looking man who fled in a white vehicle. Police issued a bolo. Be on the lookout for white vans, trucks, even ice cream trucks. Dozens were pulled over. Hundreds were searched. None of them were connected to the case. It was later discovered that the man who gave the Arab shooter description hadn't even been at the scene at the time of the shooting. Security footage placed him leaving the parking lot 3 minutes after Linda was killed. He had made the entire story up. Why? No one knows. He was later charged with obstruction of justice. But the damage had been done. That false lead wasted countless man-hours and almost cost investigators the real suspects. A few days later, emergency dispatch in Montgomery County received a chilling call. The voice was male. Calm, clear. Don't speak. Just listen. We are the ones doing the shootings in your area, and here's how you know it's us. We left a tarot card that says, "Call me God." We've tried to contact you 3 times. You haven't responded. People have died because of your failure. He then mentioned a previously unreported shooting, one that occurred inside a liquor store in Montgomery County weeks earlier, involving a revolver. In that case, a woman had been shot and killed. The detail had never been released publicly. That was the proof. The caller was real. The killer, or at least one of them, had just made contact. The FBI now knew 2 things. 1, the sniper wanted to negotiate. 2, the killer was following the media coverage closely. The stakes were rising fast. The sniper had spoken, but he didn't just want attention, he wanted a deal. A letter arrived shortly after the call, placed in a Ziploc bag and left in a wooded area near the scene of the most recent attack. Inside was a typed message, cold, structured, and threatening. It began with the same signature phrase, "Call me God." Then came the demand. You will deposit $10 million into a Bank of America account. This account must allow unlimited withdrawals from any ATM in the world. You have until 9 a.m. Monday to complete the transaction. If you attempt to apprehend us during withdrawal, prepare more body bags. And at the bottom, a postscript more chilling than any threat. Your children are not safe, anywhere, anytime. Inside the bag was also a DNA sample. The FBI ran it through CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, but no match was found. Still, it was something. The killer had left behind his first forensic trace. The authorities were now engaged in psychological warfare. The sniper had proven he could strike anyone, anywhere. And now he was trying to control the investigation. The demand for money, paired with a threat to children, pushed the fear into new territory. The FBI's behavioral analysis unit weighed in. The sniper wanted power, control, recognition. He was watching the media closely and reacting to police strategies. And now, with a deadline for payment, the team was on the clock. Law enforcement responded strategically. Rather than publicly deny the demands, they played along, buying time. Analysts dissected the language of the letters. Linguists examined word choice, grammar, and phrasing. Even the type of paper and ink were analyzed. Meanwhile, the manhunt intensified. Mobile units were dispatched across 3 states. Surveillance helicopters patrolled suburban zones. Undercover agents posed as civilians in parking lots and shopping centers. But then came a breakthrough from a totally unrelated case. The shooter had mentioned a liquor store killing that had occurred weeks earlier. A woman had been shot inside the store, execution style, with a revolver. Police had ruled it a robbery. At that crime scene, the assailant had accidentally dropped a firearm magazine, the kind used for loading bullets into rifles. At the time, it had seemed like a small clue. But now, with the sniper claiming responsibility, the FBI re-examined it. Forensic analysts dusted the magazine for prints, and they found one. The print matched a young man already in immigration records, Lee Boyd Malvo, a 17-year-old Jamaican national who had recently entered the United States. But Malvo wasn't just a suspect. He was a connection. In Malvo's immigration paperwork, one name came up again and again, John Allen Muhammad, the same man who had been mentioned weeks earlier in a dismissed tip, a Gulf War veteran with extensive weapons training, known to own a Bushmaster rifle. Everything was starting to align. The FBI reopened the call logs and found the original tip about Muhammad. It had come from Robert Holmes, a former Army colleague. Holmes had warned that Muhammad was unstable, obsessed with his ex-wife and children, and owned a rifle matching the sniper's weapon. He also said Muhammad had spoken about going to Washington. At the time, the call was one of more than 100,000 tips and had been overlooked. Now, it was gold. Agents contacted Holmes again and asked him to listen to the recordings of the sniper's calls to 911. Without hesitation, he confirmed, "That's John. That's his voice." Within hours, the FBI had pieced together a basic profile. John Allen Muhammad, 41 years old, veteran of the Gulf War, trained as a marksman, recently divorced, had lost custody of his 3 children, known to be radicalized after September 11th, close relationship with a teenage boy, Lee Boyd Malvo. Now they needed to find them. Investigators began digging deeper into their backgrounds, and what they found was unsettling. Muhammad had changed his name from John Williams after converting to Islam. His life had spiraled after losing custody of his children. Friends reported he had become isolated, bitter, and increasingly paranoid. He had served honorably in the military, but left with deep psychological wounds. He had been living in shelters and moving state to state. Malvo, meanwhile, was a teenager with a tragic past. Born in Jamaica, he had been abandoned by his father and abused by his mother. He met Muhammad in Antigua, where the two formed a bond. To Malvo, Muhammad became a father figure. To Muhammad, Malvo was the perfect disciple. They lived together in homeless shelters, in cheap motels, and sometimes inside their car, a dark blue 1990 Chevrolet Caprice. The car was key. Reports began surfacing that witnesses had spotted a blue sedan, not a white van, near multiple crime scenes. At the time, the white van narrative had been so dominant that these details had been dismissed. Now, they fit perfectly. The FBI issued a nationwide bolo for Muhammad, Malvo, and the blue Chevrolet Caprice. On October 22nd, the sniper struck one last time. Conrad Johnson, a 35-year-old bus driver, was shot and killed as he climbed into his vehicle to begin his morning route. It was 6 a.m. The fatal bullet came from the same Bushmaster rifle. That evening, investigators made a critical decision. They would release the suspects' names, photos, and vehicle information to the public. 6 hours later, at 1 a.m. on October the 24th, a man resting at a rest stop off I-70 in Maryland recognized the blue Chevrolet Caprice parked near his truck. He called 911. Police quietly surrounded the vehicle. Inside, Muhammad and Malvo were asleep. There was no struggle. SWAT officers opened the doors, pulled both men out, and placed them under arrest. The nightmare was over. When investigators searched the Caprice, they were stunned. The back seat had been modified to allow access to the trunk. A hole had been drilled near the license plate. From inside the trunk, the shooter could lie prone, slide the rifle barrel through the hole, and fire without being seen. It was a mobile sniper's nest, concealed, stable, and deadly. The Bushmaster XM-15 was inside, along with scope, ammunition, and more handwritten notes. DNA found in the Ziploc bag matched both Muhammad and Malvo. They had left behind everything investigators needed, but only after weeks of fear, panic, and bloodshed. The terror had ended. But the story was far from over. With John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo in custody, the focus now shifted from the streets to the courtroom. The trial would reveal a disturbing portrait of manipulation, indoctrination, and a mission far more twisted than anyone had imagined. Almost immediately, Malvo began talking. At first, he confessed to all the murders, claiming full responsibility. He said Muhammad had nothing to do with it, that he had acted alone. But investigators didn't buy it. The forensic evidence told a different story. Both men's DNA had been found on the rifle. Both had written parts of the letters, and both had traveled together across states where attacks had occurred. The level of coordination, the vehicle modifications, the planning. It was too complex for a teenager alone. Under pressure and with legal counsel, Malvo changed his story. He admitted Muhammad had trained him, that he had taught him to shoot, to kill, to hide, that Muhammad had selected the victims. Malvo described being brainwashed, molded, and instructed to obey without question. To the prosecution, he was a killer. To the defense, he was a child soldier in a domestic war orchestrated by a broken man. John Allen Muhammad was charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder and acts of terrorism. Prosecutors sought the death penalty. In court, he remained mostly silent. He declined to testify, showed no emotion, and rarely looked at the jury. His defense team argued he was mentally unfit, that his military service had left him with untreated PTSD and delusional thinking. But the evidence was overwhelming. Ballistics, fingerprints, letters, and witness statements painted a clear picture. In March 2004, Muhammad was found guilty and sentenced to death. Lee Boyd Malvo was tried separately. At just 17 years old during the attacks, he was ineligible for capital punishment under federal law. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. During his trial, more of the truth emerged. Malvo revealed what Muhammad had truly been planning. The chaos, the killings, the letters, they were a smokescreen. Muhammad's real goal was to use the sniper attacks as a distraction. He wanted to terrorize the D.C. region long enough for police to lose control, and in that chaos, kidnap his 3 children from his ex-wife and flee the country. But it didn't stop there. According to Malvo, Muhammad had a broader vision: to raise and train an army of children, 70 boys and 70 girls, in Canada. He wanted to teach them guerrilla warfare, indoctrinate them with extremist ideology, and one day return to the U.S. to launch a revolution. A new society, one that he believed would end racial injustice, a warped version of justice through mass violence. It sounded delusional, like something out of a dystopian novel, but it had been real enough to claim 16 lives. For the families of the victims, justice took time. On November 10, 2009 at 9:11 p.m., John Allen Muhammad was executed by lethal injection at the Greensville Correctional Center in Virginia. He declined to make a final statement. Witnesses said he showed no emotion as he died. Lee Boyd Malvo remains in prison, serving multiple life sentences. In recent years, he has expressed remorse, giving interviews in which he describes his regret, his psychological state, and his admiration for Muhammad, which he says has long since turned to shame. His case has reopened debates about juvenile sentencing, brainwashing, and culpability. Some advocate for re-evaluation of his sentence. Others argue that his crimes were too severe to justify anything less than life behind bars. The D.C. sniper case changed the way Americans thought about random violence. It reshaped how police departments respond to active threats, how the FBI coordinates with local law enforcement, and how forensic science is used under pressure. It also left scars. For weeks, millions of people lived in fear, afraid to walk across parking lots, pump gas, or send their children to school. The randomness of the attacks made them uniquely terrifying. There was no pattern, no warning, no logic, just the silent threat that at any moment, from any direction, death could come. In the end, what caught the killers wasn't high-tech surveillance or a shootout. It was a fingerprint on a dropped magazine, a trace of humanity in the middle of terror. It reminds us that evil, no matter how calculated, leaves a mark. The story of the D.C. snipers isn't just about murder. It's about manipulation, about how fear can paralyze a nation, about how a man's obsession can destroy innocent lives, and how a boy, abandoned and exploited, can be turned into a weapon. It's a story of pain, of justice, and of the price of silence. And it's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, truth eventually comes to light.